You're on a call. Laptop open, camera on, and note stock blinking in the tab behind it. Someone's talking. You're nodding. You're also typing, because obviously you can multitask. Everyone can. Then someone says your name. Sorry, what was the question? Nothing dramatic pulled your attention away. No fire alarm, no phone ringing. You were just doing two things at once, the way you do every day, and one of them quietly vanished. This isn't a you problem. It happens in meetings, in classrooms, in cars stopped at red lights, to people who are otherwise sharp at their jobs. It happens on an ordinary Tuesday, not just on a bad day. Here's the part that should bother you. That gap wasn't bad luck. It happens almost every time you try to run two thinking tasks through your head at the same time, and there's a specific, testable reason why. Multitasking, the thing you think you're doing right now, isn't actually a setting your brain has. The word itself didn't even start out being about people. Computer engineers coined it in the 1960s to describe a single processor handling several programs by switching between them so fast it looked simultaneous from the outside. We borrowed the word for ourselves decades later and quietly dropped the part about the switching. What you're doing is switching. Fast. Task to task, thought to thought, dropping one thread to grab the next and then doubling back. Psychologists have a name for the gap that opens up every time you make that switch. They call it the switch cost, and it's the reason your brain went blank the second someone said your name. There are three pieces of this worth knowing: why your brain can only make one real decision at a time, what a task switch actually costs you, and why it feels so good to do anyway. Here's where they all start. To see why, look at the smallest possible version of multitasking, two choices, made half a second apart. In the 1950s, psychologists ran an experiment stripped down to almost nothing. A light flashes on the left. You press the matching button. A split second later, a second light flashes on the right. You press that button too. Here's the strange part. Even though each choice took barely a quarter of a second on its own, the second response always came in slower when it landed close behind the first. Not because your fingers got tired, not because the second light was harder to see. Something in your head was making you wait. Cognitive psychologist Harold Pashler spent years narrowing down exactly where that wait was happening, and he found a bottleneck. A single stage in your brain where you decide what to do about something. That stage can only process one decision at a time. A second decision that arrives while the first one is still in there doesn't get handled alongside it. It gets held at the door. This is also why some pairs of tasks feel completely free, and others don't. Walking while you talk barely costs you anything, because walking doesn't need that decision-making stage once you've learned it. Reading a text message while you drive is a different story. Both of those tasks want the same stage, at the same time, and one of them has to wait its turn. That's why a 2-second glance at your phone at a red light can cost you a lot more than 2 seconds. Your eyes come back to the road before your attention does. Other labs have run their own versions of Pashler's experiment since, with different tasks, different senses, different age groups, and the doorway keeps showing up. It isn't a quirk of one study. It's a basic feature of how a human brain processes decisions. Picture a hallway with exactly one door and no way around it. It doesn't matter how many people are trying to get through, they still go one at a time. That doorway explains why two decisions can't really happen at once. But your day isn't built from decisions half a second apart. It's built from whole tasks, minutes apart. Writing an email, then answering a message, then going back to the email. And that's where the real cost shows up. In 2001, researchers Joshua Rubinstein, David Meyer, and Jeffrey Evans put people through a set of tasks and measured what happened every time they had to jump between two of them. The jump itself cost time. Not a little. On some tasks, switching back and forth ate up as much as 40% more time than doing the same two tasks one after the other, start to finish. The tasks weren't even hard. Simple math problems, simple shape sorting. The size of the individual task barely mattered. What mattered was just the number of times they had to switch. And the cost isn't only time. Part of your attention gets left behind. Business researcher Sophie Leroy calls it attention residue. When you leave a task before it's actually finished, a piece of your focus stays stuck on it, the way a tab keeps running quietly in the background even after you've clicked away. You open the next task, but you're not fully there. A slice of you is still finishing the sentence you didn't finish, still holding the number you didn't write down. It adds up faster than you'd think. Psychologist Gloria Mark tracked people working on screens all day and found their attention moved to something new, roughly every 40 seconds, even on days with no meetings and no real emergencies. Most of those switches weren't forced on them. Nobody made them check the second tab. The mind just went looking for it. That's why the email you wrote while half listening on a call reads a little off when you reread it tomorrow. Not wrong, just thinner. Written by someone who was only 60% in the room. So every switch costs you time on the way out and a piece of focus on the way in. Which raises an obvious question. If multitasking is this expensive, why does it feel so good to do it? In 2009, a team at Stanford, Eyal Ophir, Clifford Nass, and Anthony Wagner, set out to test something specific. Surely people who multitask constantly, the ones juggling 5 browser tabs and 2 group chats all day, get better at it. Practice should count for something. They tested heavy multitaskers against people who rarely multitasked, on the exact skills multitasking demands, filtering out irrelevant information, switching between tasks cleanly, holding the right details in mind. The heavy multitaskers didn't win. They lost, on every measure. The people who multitasked constantly were worse at ignoring distraction and worse at switching tasks than the people who mostly did one thing at a time. So if it doesn't make you better at it, and it costs you time and focus every single time you do it, why does checking that second screen feel like progress? Because your brain isn't scoring you on output, it's scoring you on novelty. Every switch, every new tab, every notification is a small hit of something new to react to, and your brain reads new as reward. That's a real chemical response, not a character flaw. It's just built to notice change, not to notice whether the change was worth noticing. It runs on the same pull as a slot machine. You don't know ahead of time whether the next check will actually matter, a real message or just another ad. That uncertainty is the hook. Your attention isn't being pulled toward what's important, it's being pulled toward what's unopened. Busy is not the same feeling as productive. It just shares an address with it. Put the 3 pieces together and the myth falls apart on its own. There's a bottleneck in your head that only lets one real decision through at a time. Every switch through that bottleneck costs you measurable time and leaves a residue behind that follows you into the next task. And the feeling that tells you you're getting away with it, that hit of busy energy, isn't measuring your output at all. It's just your brain enjoying the change. Stack that across a full workday, and the math turns ugly fast. A handful of switch costs and a few scraps of leftover attention barely register on their own. Dozens of them, spread across 8 hours, is a workday that never gets deep enough into anything to actually finish it well. Focus was never the missing ingredient. The missing piece was noticing that 2 things sharing your attention always cost one of them something. Gloria Mark's research on workplace interruptions found something similar. People interrupted mid-task took over 20 minutes, on average, to fully return to where they'd left off. 20 minutes, recovered from a single glance at a notification. Multiply that across a normal day full of pings, and the math on a to-do list stops adding up long before lunch. None of this means you're bad at multitasking. It means multitasking, the version where 2 thinking tasks run at full speed at the same time, was never actually available to you. Nobody's had that setting. Not you, not the person who insists they're great at it, not the researchers who study it for a living. What you actually have is a very fast switch. And a fast switch, run carelessly, feels exactly like doing 2 things at once, right up until someone says your name and you have nothing to hand them. So go back to that call. Laptop open, notes dock blinking, someone talking. You don't have to close every tab and become a monk about it. That's not really the point here. But the next time you catch yourself reaching for a second task before the first one's actually done, that's the moment worth noticing. Not because switching is wrong, because you now know exactly what it costs and exactly why it felt free. Multitasking was always going to lose to a well-timed question, not because you weren't paying attention, because there's only one door and it can only let one thing through at a time. That's true whether the 2 things are a work call and a note stock, or a conversation with someone you love and the phone buzzing in your pocket. The door doesn't care how important either task is. It only lets one through. Keep that in mind the next time two things both feel urgent at once. The two things were never happening at once. One of them was just waiting its turn behind that single door. And something in you already knew that. The second your name came out of someone else's mouth and you had nothing ready to say back.